We return now to the historic summit in Singapore between President Trump and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. The road that has led to this meeting has been long and dangerous, littered with fraught diplomacy, broken agreements, and threats of war. But as Nick Schifrin reports, again from Singapore, Mr. Trump has expressed hope that he can solve a problem that has bedeviled 4 American presidents.
25 years ago, North Korean leader Kim Jong-il, the current leader's father, made a critical decision. His country was desperately poor and suffered malnourishment and famine, but he built a nuclear program to guarantee his regime's security. In 1993, he threatened to kick out inspectors from plutonium reactors that could build nuclear weapons. In response, President Clinton drafted plans for war.
It is pointless for them to try to develop nuclear weapons because if they ever use them, it would be the end of their country.
The intelligence community assessed in 1994 that if these reactors were completed, the North Koreans probably would have had enough plutonium and enough time to produce about 100 nuclear weapons. So the idea here was, don't let that happen.
In 1994, a beardless Robert Gallucci tried to defuse the crisis diplomatically by negotiating with North Koreans who were a little rough around the edges.
They had ill-fitting suits. My opposite number would yell if he was excited. He would pound the table.
But after 17 months, the U.S. and North Korea signed the agreed framework. North Korea promised to dismantle its reactors, and the U.S. promised to replace them with reactors more suitable for power than bombs, and pursue normalization with the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or DPRK.
This framework document, when it is implemented, should resolve the outstanding issue over the DPRK nuclear program.
Relations peaked in 2000 when Secretary of State Madeleine Albright visited Pyongyang, and top North Korean military officer Marshal Jo Myung-rok visited Washington. But the U.S.'s promised replacement reactors, which were supposed to fill this pit, were never finished, and the U.S. never offered the North Koreans normalization.
They regard us as having failed to complete our obligations. And they mean by that both the fact that we didn't finish power reactors, but I think more importantly that we never normalized relations.
But the North Koreans also broke promises. They began creating a second uranium path toward a bomb with centrifuges similar to these, which caused critics to say North Korea never intended to denuclearize, and the U.S. never understood it had been conned.
The agreed framework came out of the diplomatic process, which ended up with North Korea cheating and continuing to develop new and more dangerous weapons. That's the pattern. And the agreed framework was the first time we held this football for Lucy like Charlie Brown.
In the 2000s, Mike Green helped negotiate with the North Koreans for a Bush administration that scaled back on promised aid for North Korea. In response, North Korea reactivated its plutonium reactor. The Bush administration made threats.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
But with no good military options, the U.S. turned to Russia, China, South Korea, and Japan for six-party diplomacy. The U.S. again promised a replacement reactor and normalization, and North Korea again promised to abandon its nuclear program. And again, the U.S. expressed confidence.
A very important moment in their history to make this turn and to turn away from these sorts of weapons.
But North Korea did not turn away from nuclear weapons. In 2006, North Korean TV announced, and a massive crowd celebrated, the country's first nuclear test.
The North Koreans were not prepared to give up nuclear weapons. These weapons are just too essential for their survival.
Which is why most analysts believe North Korea continued to test, despite international sanctions that targeted all of North Korea's exports.
President Barack Obama.
Like his predecessors, President Obama also used threats.
We will not hesitate to use our military might to defend our allies and our way of life.
And tried out diplomacy in fits and starts. But by 2017, North Korea tested an intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach the east coast of the U.S. and showed off what it called a thermonuclear bomb. By then, Kim Jong-un had replaced his father, killed his own uncle to consolidate power, and dramatically accelerated the North Korean nuclear and weapons programs. And by then, Donald Trump was president. Both were willing to threaten war.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
The entire United States is within range of our nuclear weapons, and a nuclear button is always on my desk.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
The administration believes that rhetorical pressure, combined with unprecedented sanctions that targeted North Korea's oil and coal exports, forced Kim Jong-un to negotiate. But North Korea chose to negotiate, says Wendy Sherman, who focused on North Korea for the Clinton and Obama administrations.
I think the sanctions helped. I think, though, the fundamental reason that Kim Jong-un is coming to the table is because he has his nuclear weapons. He has a delivery system to deliver those nuclear weapons. He's gotten what he needed. He wanted to get the recognition and the dignity of a meeting with the President of the United States.
And it is that dignity that this summit provides.
By agreeing to this summit, essentially without conditions, the President has handed North Korea two of its major objectives. Number one, de facto recognition as a nuclear weapon state. Kim Jong-un is having summits with everybody. And number two, the sanctions pressure's off. This summit has given the Chinese an alibi to back off on their economic pressure and their 90% of North Korea's trade.
Senior administration officials describe this summit as a kind of smell test to see whether they can avoid making the mistakes of the past and whether Kim Jong-un is more willing to denuclearize than his predecessors.
In Singapore, Kim Jong-un could go further than previous negotiating teams, but many analysts are skeptical.
The North Koreans usually come into these talks pre-scripted and don't have the permission to do anything other than read their talking points. That will be different for Donald Trump because it's the supreme leader himself. Kim Jong-un will be free to ad lib and say things that are probably pretty clever. He lived abroad, he speaks English and French, and so he'll find ways to charm, offer historical breakthroughs that are in fact not breakthroughs.
U.S. officials admit they went into the summit not knowing whether Kim Jong-un is here to buy time or invest in a new future.
I myself think it's very hard, someplace between very hard and impossible to know without testing. I favor negotiations as a method of testing.
In Singapore, the U.S. will consider lifting sanctions and offering security guarantees in exchange for denuclearization. The two sides will also discuss formally ending the Korean War that devastated the peninsula and was never officially ended.
We all want the President to succeed. It is in our national security interest that he succeed. So take a deep breath, get started, have a good first summit, open the door, but then know to really open that door, to have the victory lap the President's looking for, is going to take a considerable amount of time, attention to detail, and patience.
In recent weeks, President Trump has tried to find that patience and reduce expectations. But with so much on the line, after so much history, the president is hoping to make some of his own. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Nick Schifrin in Singapore.